Okay. In order to resolve a possible date of when Matthew, the Gospel according to Matthew might have been written, we need to go to a side topic. Somewhere around the late 80s, maybe as late as 90 AD, the Jewish leaders added what has come to be called the 19th blessing. Traditionally in the synagogue meetings, they had 18 blessings. And but around the late 80s, maybe as late as the 90s, they added a 19th blessing. And that 19th blessing basically was, quote, a curse against heresies, comma, with Christians and Nazarenes in mind. So the curse was specifically by the leaders, the rabbis, who had not followed to faith in Christ, and they were taking a firm stand against these Christians, the heretics. And it's interesting that they specifically named Nazarenes. So that's good. So we were around that long ago. So fast forward back to recent scholarship today, one group feels that the references to the Gentiles in the book of Matthew are an expression of hurt on the part of Jewish Christians reacting to this very pointed blessing, which was actually a curse. So this group would say it was written later, after this curse had been popularized. The other main view would hold to an earlier date of composition, maybe the mid-60s, and these would see the Gentile insertions as an encouragement to a Jewish congregation to reach out and invite their neighbors and embrace them, even though they're Gentiles, to embrace them into their community. So coming back to when. Estimates, again, range 60s to into the 90s. Personally, I am comfortable with it being a redactor that drew on Matthew's writings, and therefore I am comfortable with a composition in the late 80s, even as late as the 90s. Yeah, for one thing, if you read the Gospel of Matthew, if you read it objectively, there is no hint in there that the writer was personally involved in any of the activities. He's reporting something that happened that he's been told about, but he does not tell it, any of it, as an eyewitness. Whereas Luke, in the book of Acts, Luke slips into the first person plural, as we'll see when we study Luke. Mark, as I said a couple of weeks ago, he slips in his personal ID there in Mark chapter 15 when he talks about the young man who was almost arrested with Jesus. John keeps talking about the disciple whom Jesus loved. So each of those is giving their personal ID, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Matthew doesn't have any of that in there. And so I'm comfortable with it being a redactor who took some of Matthew's information, and I'm comfortable with it being written as late as the late 80s or even AD 90. If you have a different view, you're welcome to a different view. But if I ask you, if I throw in a pop quiz later on and I say, when was Matthew written? Then the answer I want from you for that kind of a question would be late 80s, early 90s. If I ask you who wrote the Gospel of Matthew, then I will be wanting from you a response of a redactor drew from source material that Matthew had written. But again, personally, you can have what view you want to have. Okay. I want to insert here something that might explain some of the wording that I use. If you listen to other instructors, they may sound as if their view is absolute fact, and they will convince you that no reasonable person would question them. And some of them have every right to their certainty. For my part, I prefer to say, it seems this way, or I might say, I'm not sure. Where did you go? Why do you keep doing this? Well, I lost my visual and now I can't see you at all. Okay. Can you see me now? Can you see my PowerPoint again?
Yes, Pastor.
Okay. This is crazy today. This is crazy. Okay. The reason I use these other phrases of it seems this way or I'm not sure is that I have read enough to realize that good, godly men and women have different views. But I have not read enough to say for certain this is the way it happened. So that is why you will hear me say something like, in this class, we will hold to this position. I know that if and when you take other courses, other instructors may likely give you other viewpoints, and that's fine. We're still all in the process of learning, right? So with that side point, let's continue. The relationship. We've dealt with this already. You already know that the relationship for something being accepted in the canon is that the person was either an apostle or close associate. If it was not Matthew, then this redactor was a close associate with him. So how did he write it? Again, we have Papias' statement. We've talked about the redactor. We've talked about Matthew writing some accounts and the writer probably drawing on other accounts. And that's where I want to take us just a little bit further in the discussion of the synoptic issue, the synoptic problem. Depending on who you read, you will learn that between 90 to 95% of Mark is found in Matthew. And of that, 55% is word for word, verbatim. So obviously, there is a literary relationship. Matthew clearly depends on Mark for his outline, what Ben Witherington in the video last week, what he calls the bone structure of his account. But Matthew tweaks Mark's material and adds his own enough so that we get a more well-rounded sense of who Jesus was. And then when he gets the structure there, Matthew adds these 5 or 6 blocks of teaching. Most people say 5 blocks of teaching. Witherington says 6. That's another topic that we might get into and we might not. I like this drawing because it really, in my opinion, illustrates the process. You see the squiggly lines there that go back and forth, that go in different, start close together, and then they spread out. And that represents the oral traditions. It shows the role of oral tradition at first. Then as time passed and different ones realized that these accounts needed to be written down, the apostles were leaving Jerusalem. James, the son of Zebedee, had already been martyred. More and more people, more and more believers were living outside of the immediate Judea region, did not know the immediate story, the direct story of Jesus, but they were coming to faith. And so various people started writing, gathering together these oral tradition accounts, putting them together, putting them into writing. That's what these squiggly, wiggly lines going back and forth, that's what they represent. And then you have Mark. You see Mark there is first. Well, you see Q, and we'll talk about Q later on when we get into synoptic gospels a little bit more. But of the gospels that we have, the general viewpoint is that Mark was the first of the canonical gospels to be written. Augustine of Hippo had a different opinion, but Augustine was wrong about other things also. So you have Mark down here. New Testament scholarship is generally accepted that Mark was the first to put into writing his basic account, first of the canonical gospels. And then along came Matthew, that you see below that, and Luke over in the other direction. So then how did he write it? Well, then you have this cartoon that obviously takes from modern principles of plagiarism and applies it to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Clearly, there was some copying going on, but as I've said before, copying was not the crime of plagiarism that it is now. In fact, it was accepted and even enjoyed, appreciated, and approved. So when we talk about how did Matthew write his account, he took some from Mark, he took some from Q, as we will talk about later on, and some from other sources that were being written. And he wrote from his own account, and then the redactor took that and assembled it together by the Holy Spirit's inspiration. The result is that in Matthew, Jesus is not a lion suddenly jumping out here, racing here and back and forth. In Matthew, Jesus is the human face of God. He is the teacher of Israel. And that brings us to Nancy's fourth question. What is the message? We use lion for Mark. We use the human face of God, man, to represent Jesus in Matthew. We need to remember, as we move into the message of Matthew, we need to remember to keep a distinction. We are not asking what was Jesus' message here. We are asking what was and is Matthew's message. In Mark, the message was, think about it. This is a parable. Mark is not going to answer the question for you. He's going to let you ask, who is this? And what does it mean to call him Messiah? And what happened to his body? And what are we going to believe? He leaves all those questions up in the air, and Jesus is a lion running here and running there, and we get to decide what to do with him. In Matthew, it is different. He has a different message. We've already heard it a few times. In Matthew, Jesus is the human face of God. It is true that Matthew does not use the precise terms for Jesus being God. He does not say it as clearly as we might want, but there are little signs. For example, why this difference? And I want to hear back from you on this one. In Mark, when you come to Peter's confession of Christ. In Mark chapter 8, verse 29, Peter simply says, "You are the Christ," which is the Greek term for "you're the Messiah." In Matthew has Peter say, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now the question is, and I want to hear your opinions on this. So get ready, get your microphones ready, and get ready to respond to me on this. Why the difference? If the only thing that Peter said was, "You are the Christ," the way Mark has it, then why did Matthew add the Son of the living God? But if Peter actually said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," why did Mark leave off that last part and only say, "You are the Christ"? Why the difference? Okay, think about the different purposes, the different messages of the two Gospels, and how this record, this difference, how that fits into the two. Okay, so I'm gonna, yeah, I wanna hear your response here. Why did Mark leave out the Son of the living God? Or why did Matthew insert the phrase, the Son of the living God?
Pastor,
Yes.
may Mark, he said to Jesus Christ, "You are the Son of the living God," because when he believed Jesus Christ, he believed also in God, who sent Jesus Christ for our great salvation and
Okay.
for our yes, sir.
Go ahead. Okay, but let
Okay.
me clarify, Manuel. Let me clarify. So, because you said Mark said the Son of the living God, but Mark didn't say that. Matthew wrote it, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So I'm asking the class, why the difference? Why did one say it this way, the other say it that way? Can somebody jump in and help Emmanuel there? Okay, I think somebody started to say something, but I didn't hear you. Any guesses? Somebody take a guess. Why the difference? Or let's start here. Which of those statements did Peter actually say? Did Peter say, "You're the Christ of the Son of the living God"? Or did Peter simply say, "You are the Christ"?
You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.
Okay, Janine, you say that he said the full part the way Matthew has it?
Yes, Pastor.
Okay. Then, okay. Somebody else, anybody else, what is your opinion? You're free to disagree with her or agree.
Pastor,
Yes.
it's in Matthew 16:20.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have the right. I'm reading it in my Bible, 16:20. But what is written in here, Pastor, is then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah.
Okay. Let me look in my thing here.
Saying is in Matthew
Verse 16.
chapter 16, verse 16.
Yeah, I have it wrong. It's 16:16. Thank you.
16:16, right?
So how many agree with Janine that Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," the full thing? Okay, there's a vote.
I agree.
Okay.
What?
Okay, I've got at least 2 people who've given a thumbs up agreeing with that. Okay. Any others?
Okay, Pastor. As my observation, according to Matthew, Jesus is the promised king. And according to Mark, Jesus is the servant of God. I think that is why Mark said, yes, you are the Christ. And Matthew says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. I think this is the
Okay. So you told us what the 2 verses say, right? Does anybody, is anybody with Mark, anybody agree with Mark that Peter only said, "You are the Christ"? Okay, now the follow-up question. If Peter said the way it is in Matthew, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," why did Mark leave that last part off? Okay, well, I'm trying to get us to look beyond the surface to the message of the gospel writer, the account, the person who wrote that account.
Pastor, I will try.
Okay.
I think in Mark, Peter only talks about Jesus as Jesus himself as Christ, as the anointed one. But in Matthew, he declared the faith. He declared Jesus and his declaration of faith about being Jesus Christ, the Son of living God.
Right. But I'm asking, why did Mark leave that out?
I think because of the readers of Mark that he wrote. Sound.
A little bit louder, Kevin.
I think the book of Mark is written for kuan na pas kanang Christians. So he just wrote that he just wrote the "You are the Christ" because Christians already know about the Christ.
Hmm. Okay, I hadn't thought of that, but that's a good theory, worth researching and testing. Okay, let's back up now. Remember what I've said about Mark's purpose. Mark does not declare Mark declares Jesus as God in the first verse. The rest of the gospel, it's only the demons and the voice from heaven. It's only the spirits, the unseen ones. Nobody human declares Jesus as God until we get to the centurion. Mark's purpose is for his readers or listeners to think about it and come to their own decision. If he had inserted here in 829, if he had inserted there the Son of the living God, then here's Peter, the head of the church, declaring it. He's taken away, Mark would have taken away all of the uncertainty, all of the question of who is this? He would have answered that question. Mark wanted to simply ask the question, have his listeners and readers think about it. And Kevin has a good point. They were Christians. So they were followers of Christ. But in those early decades, the believers were still sorting through, who is this? Who was this? Was he just a superhuman, a superman? Or was he God? And Mark is leaving it so that people can think about it. It's the parable. In Matthew, he has a different approach. He wants his readers to know that he believes and the community believes this is God. And we're not debating, for Matthew, we're not debating if he's God. We're giving you evidence of why we believe he was God. Okay, now having done that, I'm going to go to the next one and let you look at it. This is another illustration of how Mark leaves things uncertain. Matthew makes it more definite. Okay, so keep thinking about Mark saying, you make up your mind. Yes, we're Christians, but what does it mean to be Christian? What does it mean to be followers of Christ, who was Christ that we are following? And Matthew is saying, this is God in the flesh. This is the human face of God. And so we come to the crucifixion, taking the burial of Jesus' body, and you have the description, the reference to Joseph of Arimathea. And I hope I have the right verse reference here. 1543, Mark describes him simply as a prominent member of the council. Is that right? Mark 1543. But Matthew describes him as that Joseph of Arimathea had become a disciple of Jesus. So past tense, he was already a disciple. I think one of the other gospels says he was a follower, but secretly. But Matthew just says he had become a disciple of Jesus, a follower of Jesus. Why? How does that fit into the different methods, the different messages of these two gospels? So let me say a little bit about how it helps Mark's message. If Mark had said that Joseph of Arimathea was already a follower, then it would say to the readers, because not all of them were Christians, it would say to them, this is additional evidence, proof for you that you too should become a Christian. But Matthew is writing to Jewish believers, Jewish followers of Christ. So how does it help his message to tell them that this member of the council, member of the Sanhedrin, had himself already become a follower. How does that help? Is the question too vague?
Pastor,
Yes.
Joseph of Arimathea, member of the council. He is
Right.
the one who believes of Jesus Christ, and he is the one who when he Nicodemus, the body of Jesus Christ in the cross.
Right.
So,
Right. Okay. So Emmanuel,
and
here's my question. Here's my question. And I'll wait for you to think about it. Why did Matthew describe Joseph as a disciple when Mark did not describe him as that? How does how does it help Matthew's purpose to clarify that Joseph was a follower?
first, just like Nicodemus before, Joseph was an unbeliever, and he has uh, what is it? Joseph like Pharisees who did not obey and did not follow Jesus. But later on, when he was believed and especially the miracles of Jesus, and he believed Jesus Christ, he followed Jesus Christ, and he accept Jesus Christ as his own savior.
Mm-hmm.
Like Nicodemus did, Nicodemus did when he heard the word of God from Jesus, he believed and accept Jesus Christ.
Right.
Like
Right.
yes.
Okay. Thank you, Emmanuel. Somebody else jump in there and help us with why why Matthew would include this description as he's talking about Joseph of Arimathea. How does that help his purpose of his gospel? Okay, if, as my theory, as I'm inclined to believe now, if the Gospel of Matthew was written in reaction to this 19th blessing that was a curse, then by him saying, here's Joseph, a member of the council, a member of the Sanhedrin, who himself was a follower of Jesus, he is saying to these opponents of the Christian faith, he's saying, from the beginning of the Christian movement, there have been leaders who have trusted, who have followed Jesus. And so it is unfair for you to call us heretics when we have had faithful Jewish prominent leaders as part of our group from the very beginning. You see the difference there between what Matthew was saying and what Mark was saying? It does take a lot of thinking, doesn't it? You really have to give it some serious thought to follow through on that. And I'll admit that I've had a few weeks, few months to think about it and process it. So I've got a head start on you. Okay, let's move along, shall we? Can you see the whole screen, or do I have part of it covered up?
Can see
Yeah.
the whole
Mr. Mark.
You can see the whole thing? Okay, good. So we're back to the message. And I'm gonna get rid of that because I want to make sure that you see the whole thing. Okay, we're going to go back and forth. We're going to compare the beginning of Matthew with the end of Matthew, because if you've hopefully you're starting to catch on that each of the Gospels, the beginning tells the themes, and then the ending brings those themes back into focus. So, okay. So chapter 1, you have angels. The angel of the Lord in verse 20, do not be afraid. Verse 24 is a repeat of that. And then chapter 2, the angel of the Lord speaking to Joseph, get up, take the child, go to Egypt. In chapter 28, verse 2, an angel of the Lord descended from heaven. Verse 5, an angel said to the women. So you've got the angels, you've got the supernatural involved in this. That is part of Matthew's message to his opponents, to the critics, saying the supernatural God himself was involved, sending his messengers. Okay, chapter 1, and we talked about this earlier, the 4 Gentiles that are named in the genealogy. And then chapter 2, the visit of the Magi, again, Gentiles. And then in chapter 28, the Gentiles, the Great Commission. Go into all the world, go into all the nations. Wherever you're going, go into all the nations and teach them. And lo, I am with you always, even what? To the ends of the ages, to the ends of the world. And then the conflict. You've got the hint of conflict right at the beginning with the threat from Herod to trying to kill Jesus and resulting in the slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem, and the guards who report, and in chapter 28, the guards report, and the Jewish leaders bribed them to spread the lie that the body was stolen. And then you've got the indications of deity, the child instead of your child that I talked about earlier. Emmanuel, God with us. Those are in chapter 1 and 2. In chapter 28, all authority in heaven and on earth. That is a claim by Jesus, a claim of divine authority. Chapter 2, the Magi come and worship, and only God is worshiped. Extend that into chapter 3, the voice from heaven, this is my beloved Son. Chapter 4, the claims of divine identity are the basis of the temptation in chapter 4. And then in chapter 28, behold, I am with you always. And the only one who can be with us always to the end of the age is God himself. So those 2 slides, this one and the previous, this is what they were to begin with. So if you feel the need to get a picture of that, a still shot of that, you can. It's all right there. But that's just a summary, bringing it all together of what I was just talking about. So then, what's the message? Somebody speak to me. Tell me how you would phrase the message of Matthew. Not the message that Jesus gave in Matthew, but the message that Matthew was trying to communicate through his account. How would you phrase that message?
Pastor Glenn, you mean whole book of Matthew?
Right. But again, I don't mean what was Jesus' message in the book of Matthew. I mean what simple message was Matthew trying to communicate? The theme of the whole book.
The teaching of Jesus.
Say it louder, Emmanuel. I can't hear you.
The teaching of Jesus.
Okay, I still didn't. I just heard the something of Jesus.
About the teaching of Jesus.
No, I'm not asking you the teaching of Jesus. I'm asking you the theme that the book of Matthew has, what Matthew was saying about Jesus. You see, you can go to any commentary and find out explanations about the teaching of Jesus. I want us to look at the message that Matthew had in writing his account. Why he said it the way he said it.
Pastor.
Yes.
Pastor. To Matthew's story is to prove that Jesus is the Messiah, the eternal King.
Good. Okay.
To prove that Jesus is the Messiah, the eternal King.
Okay. Good. Good. Prove that he is Messiah, the eternal King. Good. Someone else pick up on that. You can either improve on what James said, or you can have your own version. Okay. Roseanne messaged me. I think she's having connection problems. She messaged promise and fulfillment. Good, good. That definitely fits in to this, and what James said fits in to what Matthew was trying to get across. You know, if he's responding to these opponents and he says, here are the promises, here's the fulfillment, then he's trying to show them that we are not the heretics, we are not the blasphemers, we are following the fulfillment of the prophecies that describe the Messiah as God. Yeah. Okay. So these are good. What was said here by James and Roseanne are good. Again, if I were to hit you with a a pop quiz one of these days about it, the answer I'm looking for is Jesus is the human face of God. Now, what James said and what Roseanne said definitely fits into that. But remember, we're trying to tie it in with the four creatures that Ezekiel saw, the four faces that Ezekiel saw, the four creatures that John saw in the book of Revelation. And so that's why we keep this terminology, the human face of God. Okay, let's move on then. Let's see if we can move on. And this is kind of in line with what Roseanne said about the prophecies being fulfilled. Yeah, I'm going to figure out Zoom about the time I don't need it any longer, I think. Okay. So you have the incredible number of prophecies that Matthew cites as being fulfilled. And some of these prophecies he quotes directly, others he simply refers to them without giving an exact quote. And then you have the sequence of narrative and discourse. This is how Matthew structures the gospel. This is not the message. This is how he structures it. But through his structure, then he is seeking to support his claim of the human face of God. Different writers associate these chapters and these discourse and narratives in different ways. And frankly, I have not had time to thoroughly coordinate the two, but they point to a connection. Different writers and speakers point to a connection between the section of the teaching and the section of the activity. And as Ben Witherington said in the video last week, this is an artificial construction because nobody says, okay, this week I'm only talking. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here on this rock and teach. And nobody says, okay, next week I'm only going and doing. I'm not going to say anything. That never happens. That's not reality. So this construction that Matthew has here of a section of teaching, a section of action, a section of teaching, another section of action, all of that is artificial. It brings together the teachings and the miracles in order to demonstrate different things about Jesus. And so usually you have people who talk about the 5 main sermons or the 5 discourses of Jesus. Ben Witherington in his video talked about 6. And if you look on this diagram at the top level, you have the 5 arrows, and the last arrow over at the far right points to a block that says 23-25. Ben Witherington divides that. He says 23 is a separate discourse with a separate audience. 24 and 25 is a separate discourse exclusively to the disciples on a different topic. So that's not a great issue for us here, because whether it's 5 or 6, these are the teachings. Now, the scholars who say 5 teachings say that that Matthew is showing that Jesus is another Moses. Ben Witherington takes the 6 teachings, the 6 discourses, and he says that Matthew is showing Jesus is greater than Moses because he has 6 discourses instead of the 5 books of the Torah. But again, this is the clothing, this is the external for the real structure. And so again, I'm drawing again from Ben Witherington's teaching last week that he says that the section from chapter 1, verse 1 up to 4:16, that is the introduction, the childhood, the infancy, the birth, and the baptism, and then in 4:17 he has an important statement there. From that time, Jesus began to, and then that begins the phase of public ministry for Jesus. And then that carries through until 1621. Now, as we saw in 1616, you have the confession of Peter. In 1620, Jesus tells them not to broadcast that. And then in 1621, yes, in 1621, we have again the phrase, from that time, Jesus began to, and then at that point, he focuses his teaching on the disciples, so that the next two discourses are more focused on the disciples, not so much to the public. Now, chapter 23, if you take that as an additional discourse, that is directed at the religious leaders in the temple. So his public ministry to everybody, anybody who would come, that's in this first part from 4:17 to 16:20. 16:21, he narrows his focus to the disciples, with the exception of that one chapter when he's giving parables aimed directly at the religious leaders and the religious establishment in the temple. And then at 26 verse 1, chapter 26 verse 1, is another interesting pattern, because at the end of the previous teachings, Matthew says, when Jesus had finished these words, and then goes on to talk about something else. But in chapter 26 verse 1, he says, when Jesus had finished all these words, in other words, the teaching is done. The only thing left now is the crucifixion and the resurrection. So, yeah. So, how did I get down there? Okay. So that's kind of a layout of the book of Matthew, but it's all within this theme of showing Jesus as the human face of God, within this theme of, and within that theme of saying, we are not the heretics. We are being faithful to the Old Testament teaching and faithful to the revelation of God. Now, I want to show you another pattern to the structure of the Gospel of Matthew. It shows this, what I'm going to show here shows a balancing. It's called a chiasmus, which I'm not concerned that you remember that word. It's spelled, well, I'll have to send it in the chat, the spelling of it. But it means that you've got different parts, and the opening of the parallels has one theme, and the ending has a balancing theme. And so the first discourse, chapters 5 to 7, has teachings for the present. And I have in here the number of verses because Burridge showed that. But we know that when Matthew wrote the gospel, he did not put chapters and verses in, so that's an artificial thing. But it does show the approximate similarity in the length of this first discourse, what we know as the Sermon on the Mount, teaching for the present, and the last discourse, chapters 24 and 25, 94 verses, teaching for the future. Now, the next teaching, the next discourse is one chapter, chapter 10, 38 verses, talking about the church's mission. This is when he's sending the 12 out. And he talks about the church's mission. Chapter 18 is the counterbalance to that, 33 verses, and talking about church life. And then in between and in a chiasmus, the middle section really carries the weight of the whole thing, is the crucial part. And these are parables of the kingdom. And in chapter 13, 50 verses, the first half is parables for the audience as a whole. And the second half, he turns to the disciples, those who really are devoted to him, and has parables and explanations for them. So it's just another interesting, I think, interesting panel of how these flow together and how Matthew has constructed his gospel. Okay, let's take a few minutes to recall some of the important points from today, okay? Now, Emmanuel has spoken up a few times, and that's good. I appreciate it, Emmanuel, but I want to have some others jump in to contribute this time to help us recall some of the main things that we reviewed today, okay? What do you remember from today's lecture? Yes, Angie, go ahead.
Matthew's message emphasized that Jesus is the human face of God.
Good. The human face of God. Good. Let's all say it together, okay? 1, 2, 3. The human face of God. Okay, good.
God.
Good. Somebody else now. What else do we remember from today's lecture? Somebody tell me who wrote the Gospel according to Matthew.
Redactor, Pastor.
A redactor, J. Marie. Okay, good. Now let's take a vote, okay? You have your device there. Let's take a vote. And with a thumbs up, with a thumbs up reaction thing, tell me how many of you believe that a redactor wrote Matthew? Now, this is not going to affect your grade. I just want to see what your opinion is. If you agree that it was a redactor rather than the Apostle Matthew, put a thumbs up in your reaction. Zero. Okay. How many of you believe that it How many of you believe that it really was Matthew, the also known as Levi the tax collector? Put a thumbs up. Okay, I've got 2 votes for that. 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. Good. I'm comfortable with that. Like I said, I don't know. I don't know. It helps me understand some of the ingredients in here when I see it as written much later. And it might have been Matthew who wrote it much later. So I'm comfortable with that. Very good. So that's a second thing that we want to put here, written by either a redactor or Matthew. Okay. Anything else we remember from this? Okay, I'm going to put up another slide here. This is for next week. I'm showing it again in case you got in here late, so that you know what to be thinking about, what to look for as we prepare for next week. I am not asking for a group project on this. You did a great job on it last week. I'm not asking for a group project in answer to these, but as you read through the book of Luke this week, pay attention to the outcasts, the unwanted, the rejected, the other undesirables, and look at the response or reaction of Jesus to these groups, the response or reaction of the powerful to these groups. So keep that in mind for next week. For this week, for our breakout time, I'm encouraging you to work on the 2 long-term projects that we have coming up. As you go to your breakout rooms, then you've got 2 long-term projects. I sent to you this week the 2 chapters. All of you got a copy of the introduction to the book Holiness in the Gospels. I want you to read that. And then each of the groups got a different chapter on a different gospel, and I want you to study that. And then your group will give a 15-minute presentation in November on holiness in each of those in your respective chapter. And then in December, we have the discipleship project. And I'm encouraging you to focus on the gospel that you have for your holiness assignment and draw from us. That way you're overlapping. As you're reading the one, you're also looking for the other. So your breakout time today and the weeks ahead will, unless I say it otherwise, will be on these 2 projects, long-term projects for November or December. Questions? Okay, I'm going to send you to your breakout rooms. I'm going to stop the recording if I can find where to do that.